How's it going, YouTube? Coming to today with another video, and today, guys, what the bring to you is going to be where to hand trap. And today we're going to be focusing on a lot more rogue and tier 2 matchups, just to make sure that you're completely ready for nationals. And there's going to be other decks that we will talk about later on in different videos as well. But I'm not going to focus on anything that comes out in like Justice Hunters, because that's just not relevant right now, and we're not looking at that because we have Nats to win. So let's make sure that we focus on that and check out today's video. If you haven't already checked out today's sponsors, definitely go and do so over on RW, Cloud, Gem, Arla, Imperium, Dragonshield, and Grimoire. Also, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, so we can hit 30,000 by the end of the year and 25,000 in the next 2 weeks. I appreciate each and every one of you so very much. Let's hop right on into where to hand trap. Lunaite is going to be a very scary deck going into nationals because it's not going to be very popular, but if you do play against this deck, it's going to be a time for sure. This deck is very cool and has a lot of different applications into the format. I really do like this deck as something that's a flex option in this format and something that you can really catch people off guard with. Masquerade is a very crazy card that turns into a Poly Search and a Miracle Fusion, which is pretty good. This is a card that you really want to get rid of, and Ogre is the best way to do that. So if you do have Ogre in your deck list, this is where you want to throw it. Now, for Valor Imperm, these cards aren't the greatest in this matchup. They're still pretty good, though. I really like hitting the Perfume. I think that's really important. You don't want your opponent to be able to get to Perfume. So that's going to be the fusion monster that I would hit with a negation. You can also hit Gold Leo if you want to, but I'm usually just waiting until I see Dancer at the board, and then going ahead and stopping the access to Lunaite Perfume. You also can Ash the Silver Hound. This card does summon from deck, so they can get the Kaleido Chick, which can dump Martin, and then Martin can bounce back your Tiger, and then you just combo from there. You can Ash the second effect of Perfume as well, which is really good, or you can Crow or Bestial the target of Perfume Engrave, or you can preemptively just Crow Perfume. So it's realistically going to be up to what you want to do with that. Also, Nibiru is going to be pretty okay. If they make the towers before 5, then it's pretty bad. If they have to combo because you had like a Nibiru and, right, it's always that. It's usually like a second hand trap. You can make your opponent do a suboptimal play and then really punish with Rock, which is really solid. Of course, that card's going to be everywhere at Nationals. It's just going to be like the Nibiru, Dominus Impulse, Lancia Droll show, right? And so we just got to play the best cards we can going into this format to make sure that we have the best opportunity to win. Next up is going to be Orcus, and there's going to be a lot of Orcus. I feel like everyone's going to play at least one just because this deck was such a fan favorite in 2019. Seeing a lot of support for it now, I can only imagine the amount of people that we see on this deck. Will it be super popular? Probably not, but I do think that is going to be in the room for sure. You want to Crow or Bestial the target of symbol whenever your opponent is trying to go ahead and banish the symbol and summon something out of the graveyard, usually being like Dingirsu. You just want to make sure that it's not going to be a problem for you, and a free send that doesn't target a card is very scary. It can also protect their board, so you really want to think about that. Nibiru is going to be, again, very 50-50. It's not always fantastic, but your opponent does combo a good bit, so you will want to make sure that you have Nibiru. If your opponent doesn't have the Babble up and they summon Galatea and they're in Nib range, you might want to just drop Rock so your opponent doesn't have access to set Crescendo, but that again really does depend if they already have like a Symbol Skeleton Engrave, but you also just make them waste resources doing that too, which is really good. We already know the less resources your opponent has, the better off for you. Bell onto the Symbol Skeletons effect, or Zombie Vamp, or Ashing Zombie Vamp. This deck will be on Horus cards, so you can also Ash Imseti, but I'm probably just waiting for the card that I'd rather Ash, right, which is just Harp Horror. So you can always just put your opponent on, like, oh, this Imseti better be the best card that you have, right? Because if they go Imseti pitch Harp, I'm not stopping the Imseti, right? Unless you're worried about, like, the rank 8 Photon, then it's a problem I understand, right? But if my opponent pitches like Imseti Harp, I'm going to have a really hard time trying to Ash that because Harp is just right there, right? So that's something that you got to think about. If you have like Ash Imperm, and then you're like, all right, I'm going to Ash the Imseti and then have the Imperm for later on, and then you can Imperm or Valor or something like Girsu, then absolutely, I understand that completely as well. You can always negate the Galatea, the new one, as well, but I'm just going after Girsu. Girsu does so much. It does so much. It pays your taxes, it folds your laundry, it will cook for you. You know, this card just does everything you want it to and more. So that's something that you really want to make sure that you do stop, because this card is as scary as it was when we all first heard about it. I remember back when it was still like really mid, we didn't have all the nice cards we do now, but we're just kind of like, wow, this card's gonna be really crazy one day, and lo and behold, here we go, right? So really cool to see again that we're gonna have Orcus in the meta. Definitely a very interesting deck, and Babel is a crazy card. So definitely keep that in mind, but you want to stop Gearsu for sure. Monarch is definitely a deck that you just want breakers for. You want Droll, you can Impulse Idea, and then you can also just like purge almost anything that they try to do in this deck. So like Tenacity, Pantheism, what have you, you know. Using Crow and Prime Monarch would be really solid here, because you can always go after the Pantheism that's engraved, but they can always add it back with Idea if you banish it. So like, very mid, right? Like, it's very not ideal. But if you think that they're in a bad spot and they need to reveal 3, then you could always go ahead and Crow right there and hope that they don't have the idea. So you got to really weigh your options in these scenarios. But ashing Pantheism when they go to discard and draw 2, I'm always doing that, because like, I'm not letting my opponent draw 2 cards ever, right? Unless there's like a crazy scenario otherwise, or they like lead Tenacity. They lead Tenacity, I'm probably more inclined to just ash Tenacity. You can also just ash Idea as well, or Valor Imperm, just to make sure that your opponent doesn't get the free summon from deck, the additional normal summon. This deck is definitely just going to be folding to a lot of Lightning Storms, a lot of Eclipses, a lot of Dusters. This is definitely going to be the deck that you want board breaks for, not necessarily hand traps. Next one up here is going to be Branded. We do not use Nibiru or Ghost Ogre in this matchup. They are not very good. You can always try to like Ogre Cartesia, but it's still like pretty mid. One thing that you can consider here for sure is if your opponent uses the trap to add back Branded Fusion Engrave, you can always go ahead and Crow that. If your opponent uses Fusion Duplication to target Branded Fusion to banish it, you can Crow Branded Fusion, and then Duplication will not resolve because it checks the card in Resolution. You can also Crow or Bestial the Branded in red target, and that card will also not resolve because it has to add a hand first, and then you can summon and then fuse if you would like to. So all very solid options, and Crow also works under Branded Loss, where Bell would not, because it negates activation, which is prevented by Branded Lost. Ash onto Branded Fusion, of course, that's going to be a no-brainer, but Bell onto the Sanctifier to make sure that you don't lose to, like, Ido, or you don't lose to Ra's Disciple, or whatever Floodgate your opponent's playing, right? That's just something that you don't want to see happen, so definitely make sure that you are going ahead and stopping that. And then using Valor Imperm onto Quem, you can always hit the Aluber, but hitting the Quem is usually really insane as well, just to make sure that you're not going to have your opponent summon like double Mirror Jade on you or get like way too far in card advantage. This is definitely going to be a pretty great hit. You can also hold Imperm for your own turn, and then try to draw phase priority Imperm the Quem, because your opponent is going to try to Sanctifier you, right? So just one less thing to worry about. But I do like negating Quem, but you can always go after Aluber as well. It just depends on if you already have Ash. Because if I already have Ash, I'm just like, yeah, sure, Aluber resolves, right? Like, there's just nothing that's really doing. So that's something where you can always save your Imperm or Valor for later. Punk is definitely going to be an interesting deck. Shout out to Mitch. That is just his deck of all time, and you know, that's one of these things where we see this deck come up time and time again as different engines, and we used to have Papaya Ruler, and we used to have so many different crazy Punk combos, and this engine has always been something that has a lot of potential, and it still has potential in the future. So we do have these cards coming back again, and let me tell you, there are some spots that you can definitely go ahead and stop these. You can Crow or Bell the effective Deer Note, of course you get that monster back, or you can just Bell Rising Scale because it summons from deck or graveyard. So that's another thing that you can ash, but you usually just ash Carp. Carp is going to summon 2 from deck, so that's something that you want to make sure that you just stop. You can ash like Foxy Tune as well, but like I'm probably always just saving all of my negation period for Carp. If I have Ash, Valor, Imperm, I'm just saving it, right? Like I want to make sure that those are gone. And you can always go ahead and Ogre onto the field spell as well. Card is a lot of free advantage and some free draws as well, so you want to make sure this is just not going to be a problem for you. This is definitely going to be something that I don't like seeing on the board because, you know, it does grant you a lot of free extenders, some free draws, and just something that you want to get rid of as soon as possible. But you want to go ahead and just stop Carp if you can. The card is very strong for the deck. For purely, this deck did just top, which is pretty cool. This deck has not really been in the meta for a long time, but whatever Pure Lily is targeting in the graveyard as a spell card, you can always go ahead and DD Crow that, so this card will not resolve and summon an Exceed. You can also Ogre onto Purely, or Valor Imperm onto Pure Lily. This is a card you want to shut down. You don't really care if Pure Lily resolves, just because it's not really going to do a whole lot. But the important interaction for where to hand trap in this one is going to be chaining Ash to the spell that is going to be chained by Noir to set Yeep. So this is a win effect, just like the Lady Labyrinth, where you are going to be activating a card, waiting to see if there's a response. If there's no response, you can then go ahead and chain your win effect, because you will still have priority at that point if your opponent has nothing, and then you can go ahead and use your win effect to go ahead and set a card. So that is really important. You go activate like Sleeping Memory, you go anything to this, your opponent goes no, and you go, alright, cool, I'm gonna chain Noir. But if they chain literally anything, then you don't get the effect of Noir, and this is one of the most impactful ways you can hit this deck, because then your opponent doesn't get to Yeep. Or you just Impulse Yeep and just don't care at all, because that's just broken. But that is something that you really should consider, because if you have Ash and you hold it this long, a lot of times that's gonna be it. Cashier of Fiendsmith. I definitely just saw something that I have not seen yet, and that was Connector and a Dolphin and a Moon, and that's just based. It's so funny to see. But this is something that you want to prepare for, because I feel like this is also going to be a deck that we're going to see a lot of Nationals. You can definitely go ahead and DD Crow the Engraver or the Requiem. The rule of thumb, though, is if you have a Magnamut, then you will go ahead and use the Magnamut on Engraver. And then in the end phase, you will go ahead and just hit the Requiem with the Druis Worm to get it out of grave. If you only have Druis Worm, then you're just going to banish the Requiem, because at that point your opponent doesn't get free recursion, they're not going to get the trap set up, it's going to be hard for them to do anything, they're not going to get the Necro equip, so it really does matter the order in which you do that. The same way as if you see your opponent drop Engraver and Necroquip and you have Nibiru, you kind of have to drop it, because your opponent's next play is usually just Caesar. So that's something that you want to make sure that you are just going ahead and clearing. A lot of times the scariest part of this end board is literally just Unicorn, because everyone's still playing one-of. So if you have Bell or Ogre, honestly, just hitting the Birth is really insane, because your opponent doesn't get the Birth interruption and they won't get Unicorns. So that's something that just kind of guarantees a lot more of your plays going through. And you don't have to play so safe, which is really nice. I would always just like Ash the Requiem here for the most part, and then Valor Imperm onto Unicorn, of course, just because in a deck like this, you're not going to get many other places to go ahead and use this, so dropping this on Unicorn is still going to be very correct. Again, very crazy body to have on board, and then also Birth is very scary too. For DD Crow, you can definitely go ahead and target the continue target, or you can just Bell continue to make sure that your opponent can't extend further. I'm always just waiting for the Rosin, so I can actually just Ash that and be done with the turn, right? Because a lot of times this deck just doesn't have enough gas to push through. But at the same time, if your opponent leads Stake Your Soul, you might want to go ahead and just stop that. Now, you can Ash or Valor Imperm the Holy Sue, there's nothing wrong with that, but just off a very generic point of just getting a monster on board immediately, Rosin is going to be the one that you want to stop, so they don't get the things like Xiaolong, they don't get the Borger, they don't get to everything that they want to in their combo, because this is going to be the best search in their deck, so that's something that you do want to cut off. Valor Imperm onto the Rosin again, but also if you have Imperm and it's your turn, draw phase Imperm on Rock is crazy, because then it's just shut off and you don't have to worry about like some unnecessary interruption. If you clear like the one body or like the two bodies, right, then your opponent just can't extend back into you unless they have like continue and they can keep like bouncing cards away from the board and what have you. But at some point, there's only so much more that they can do in situations like that, right? So that's something to really consider as well. But again, Holy Sue is going to be a very crazy card, and it does summon from deck as well, so make sure that you are going ahead and negating that if that is a problem. But if the first card that you are seeing is Rosin, then you want to just go ahead and stop that, because a lot of times this deck can brick, and it's something that can be a huge problem. If you're enjoying the content, definitely go ahead and check out my Twitter, Twitch, Discord, and Instagram, and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll catch you all next video. Thank you all so much.